forget it. So we captured various infantry units, a few men here and a few men there, and they were always very sullen, and shipped them back, of course, usually in a Jeep or one of the vehicles. Well, actually, there were a lot of older men, and then as we got into Germany, into the central part of Germany, we were quite surprised that the young boys, they were 12, 13, 14 years of age, who had been issued a great big coat and a cap and a gun and said, get out there and fight. We got into one little town. We were in convoy and heading south, and all of us, we came to a stop, and there was some rifle fire. So all of a sudden I see this young kid come barreling out of this house. There were only maybe 4 or 5 houses in the area, and bang, and down he went, of course. But it was sad that young individuals like that were so brainwashed that they were willing to fight. And of course, he ran, but he was willing to fight again. So that's why you have to, it's too bad to lose him. I remember that distinctly because that was April 23rd. The last time I have ever fired a gun. This was in a little village, and I'd set up my truck and run the wire into the CP, of course. And I, for one reason or other, hadn't started to dig a foxhole, and we got several 88 shells that came in. Right where I had the truck, maybe 100 yards away, was an ACAC gun that had been set up. And one of the shells exploded close to him, and one of the fellows there was killed. ACAC unit was right next, and one of the fellows was killed, of course. And you never saw anybody who dug a foxhole so quickly as I did after that. Normally, you always dig your foxhole. Boy, that's imperative. But for some reason, I thought, I'll get by this time. Unfortunately, one sad situation, Frenchman was riding his bicycle along as the convoy was going, and one of the tracks hit his bike, and down he went, and he was killed, of course. That was a civilian, but we saw lots of enemy that were. Actually, I would suspect most of them had been killed by the artillery, not so many from actual small arms fire. Well, we were at Kassel, and then we went to Esvega, and that's where I supposedly shot the ME-109 down. Well, I had my radio truck next to a barbed wire fence, and all of a sudden I see this ME-109 coming over, and he was maybe 150 feet up. Thank goodness he didn't see me, otherwise he might have machine gunned me, but I had my carbine up, and having been a good duck hunter years before up in Canada, I knew I had to lead him a great deal. So this I did, and I popped away with my little old pea shooter of a carbine, and he went out over the city, made a rising turn to the right, and came back about 3,000 feet in elevation. And all of a sudden I see a big black smoke trailing behind him. Well, he turned around again 180 degrees and came back. All of a sudden I see this thing coming out of the airplane, and the parachute opened, so I knew he'd given up his ship. Plane went flying across the city on its own and smashed into this big so-called mountain, but it's really a hill. And the pilot, when he came down, he was too far away from me. I couldn't leave my radio. And so whether somebody else captured him or not, I don't know. Yeah, we were in Esvega, and that's where I got, we heard about Ohrdruf concentration camp. And since we were waiting, we were held up and they wouldn't let us go on to Berlin. So a lot of us got in one of the trucks and away we went to see this Ohrdruf camp. And it was a concentration camp containing Poles and Russians, and they worked in some factories in the neighborhood. But when we got in, there were all over the so-called parade ground were bodies of the inmates who were starved to death, actually starved to death. And in some of the barracks, they had the bodies lined up in rows, one on top of the other. The stench was terrible. Another area, they had steel rails and logs, one on top of the other, and then they put the bodies there, and they were trying to burn them all so that the evidence wouldn't be there for us to see. It was terrible. For a government to condone such an action as they had at Ohrdruf and to starve these people, that's totally wrong. Oh yes, there were some survivors around, and but they were as skinny as could be. They didn't get much food. Once we got back, we put it in the back of our mind and went about our business. They had a lot of civilians there at the time, and they made them carry a lot of these bodies and put them in big grave areas that they had dug. But yeah, so even the civilians saw what was going on. Patton and Eisenhower were both visiting at that camp, yeah. Filming and everything, oh yes. Oh, they tried to deny it, but I saw it, and it was there. Of course, Ohrdruf was a small camp. That was nothing compared to Auschwitz and some of the other, and Dachau. Since we couldn't go on to Berlin, and we were only maybe 75 miles from Berlin at the time, we could have gone on, and I'm sure the Germans would have been happy to have given up to us instead of the Russians. But it had been agreed upon politically. So we got the word that, the Germans were going to set up a werewolf situation in southern Bavaria in the mountain regions. And so that's where we were assigned to go. So we had to turn south and went through different cities, Beirut, Regensburg, and along the Rhine, Passau, and finally up to Linz and Enns, Austria. And here again we had to stop. They wouldn't let us go on beyond the Enns River. The Russians were still in Vienna, and it took 3 days for them to come up and meet us. But during that time, of course, all the Germans wanted to get into our area, and we let them. Well, where they got their gasoline, I don't know, but they had their big trucks that were able to cross over the bridge and follow the road. But there was every kind of vehicle that you could imagine, anything at all that would run, they used. Oh yeah, they were almost all soldiers. One of them, well, they were somewhat sullen, and of course one of the things, I couldn't speak that much German, I have a few words and so forth, but one of the fellows said, "Oh, you Americans, you must arm us, and we must turn against the Russians, otherwise you're going to be fighting Russia." And we didn't go for that story. But they wanted us to turn around and fight the Russians, of course. Well, they were no different than what we were, really. And one of the fellows gave me his P-38, which I still have. And but they were regular Army people. And it's interesting, Mauthausen is another concentration camp right there. And I was on a trip to Europe here a few years ago. Italy, Austria, and Switzerland. One of the fellows said, "Oh, have you been to Austria before?" And I says, "Oh, yes." "Well, when?" I told him, I says, "I was here in May of 1945. He says, "You were?" I said, "Yep." He says, "I was here too." He was Jewish, and he was in Mauthausen camp. And he says, "I never forget the day that your tanks came in and broke down our gate." He says, "I knew we were free." He subsequently went on to the U.S. and became the professor of physics at New York University. So it was interesting. We didn't really have a camp. I had to sleep out in the truck, and there was one big factory area that we took over. But later on we got into better quarters, of course, hotels and things like this that we requisitioned. They eventually came up and crossed the bridge, and of course we met them there, and of course there was a lot of slapping on the backs and, "Hey!" Couldn't understand them, they couldn't understand us, but they had lots of vodka. We had some German wine, of course, but they preferred their vodka. And there was lots of toasting back and forth. Well, we finally moved back to a little town called Wels, Austria. And we were waiting there for a period of time, and finally I was shipped back to a little place called Seekirchen near Salzburg. My two other buddies who were radio operators, they were assigned to a unit that was going to be sent to the Pacific. So I said, hey, you're not breaking us up. So I said, put my name down on this list too. So we started out and we're in convoy back along the Autobahns and eventually got back close to Metz. And it was just before that I had my radio on and I was listening to the BBC, and they came on and said that an atom bomb had been dropped on Japan and that it was equal to 20,000 tons of TNT. So shortly after that, of course, the war was over. And we weren't shipped to the South Pacific, thank goodness for that. They eventually sent us back to Camp Chicago. And when my time come up, why, they transported us to Le Havre, which was fairly well rehabilitated by that time as far as piers were concerned. We went on board our ship, and I can remember looking down at the pier, and here was our little mascot. He was a little fellow that we picked up. He must have been 10 or 11 years of age, and he went with us. We picked him up in France. He was an orphan and of Polish extraction, and he went all through the war with us. But here he was on the pier and he couldn't come with us. Whether he ever got here or not, I don't know. But that was kind of sad. But we got on our boat and headed for New York again. It was actually, it was quite nice going back. There weren't any real storms. There's always waves, of course. Didn't have to worry about submarines or anything like that. Well, that was really interesting in that as we came by the Statue of Liberty, of course we were all on deck, and most of us did cry. And it was a great sight. So we knew we were home, finally. We had a couple of days at Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and that was the one time that I got on the phone and called my mother up in Canada to tell her that I was back and okay. And then it wasn't long, just 2 or 3 days, and they had us on the trains and right on to Fort McCoy. And of course, that's where I was discharged. And then with my duffel bag with all my souvenirs, and I headed back to the farm. Eventually, I took the train on up to Canada to see my mother again. And of course, she was tickled pink to see me. I don't know whether her prayers made a difference or not, but I got back. And after that, I came back to the farm, and under the GI Bill, I went to Madison and knew that, hey, I had to really work in order to make the grade, because there were a lot of fellows who were competing, especially to get into medical school. I've always wanted to be a doctor. We had an old family doctor in the town of Camrose, and he was my idol. I didn't like to lose that amount of time, but it made a man out of me. And also, you realized that if you wanted to become a doctor, you better get to work and really knuckle down. And that's what I did. I made the grade and graduated, and then specialized in general surgery, set up practice in Appleton, and was there for 31 years.